The stars had never seemed so peaceful as they did from the observation deck of Kepler Station. Commander Daniel Hart stood at the window with a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the distant lights of a nebula paint the void in shades of purple and gold. Behind him, the quiet hum of machinery filled the air, a constant reminder that 2,000 souls depended on this station to keep them alive in the emptiness of space. Kepler Station sat on the very edge of human territory, a small outpost built into an asteroid rich with rare minerals. It was not a military base. It was not a fortress. It was simply a place where miners dug into rock, scientists studied the stars, and families tried to build lives far from Earth. Daniel had commanded this station for 3 years, and in that time, he had come to love its quiet routines and simple purpose. Lieutenant Maria Santos walked up beside him, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor. She was his chief of security, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm voice that never wavered even in difficult moments. She carried a tablet in her hands and wore a slight frown on her face. "Commander, we're picking up some strange readings on the long-range sensors," she said. "Multiple contacts. Moving fast. They don't match any ship signatures in our database." Daniel turned away from the window. "How many contacts?" "At least 30. Maybe more. They'll reach us in about 20 minutes. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. 30 ships was not a trading convoy. 30 ships was not a scientific expedition. 30 ships moving fast toward a remote outpost meant only one thing. "Sound the alert," he said quietly. "Get everyone to the shelters, and try to raise Earth command on the long-range transmitter." The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos. Alarms rang through the corridors of Kepler Station as families grabbed their children and rushed toward the reinforced shelters deep inside the asteroid. Workers abandoned their posts in the mining tunnels. Scientists left experiments running and hurried to safety. Maria coordinated the evacuation with quick, efficient orders, while Daniel made his way to the command center. Dr. Caroline Webb met him there, her medical coat still stained from whatever procedure she had been performing when the alarm sounded. She was the station's chief physician, a woman who had delivered babies and treated mining accidents and kept people alive through every crisis the frontier could throw at them. "What's happening?" she asked. "Unknown ships approaching. A lot of them." Daniel sat down at the main console and began trying to establish contact with the approaching fleet. "This is Kepler Station to unidentified vessels. Please respond. State your intentions." Static filled the speakers. He tried again and again, cycling through every frequency, every language pack in the system. Nothing came back, but silence. Maria's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, I have visual on the lead ships, putting it on screen now." The main display flickered to life, and Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. The ships were unlike anything he had ever seen. They were angular and dark, covered in strange geometric patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect formation, like predators closing in on wounded prey. "Those aren't human ships," Caroline whispered. "No," Daniel agreed. "They're not." The first shot came without warning. A beam of bright green energy lanced out from the lead vessel and struck Kepler Station's outer hull. The entire structure shuddered, and warning lights began flashing across every console in the command center. Daniel grabbed the edge of his seat to keep from falling. "Shields are failing," Maria reported from her station. "They're targeting our weapons systems. We can't return fire." "Keep trying to reach Earth," Daniel ordered. "Send everything we have. Coordinates, sensor data, visual recordings. Whatever gets through, gets through." Another blast rocked the station. Somewhere in the distance, Daniel heard the terrible sound of metal tearing apart. The attackers were not trying to disable them. They were not trying to capture them. They were trying to destroy them completely. In the medical bay, Caroline worked frantically to treat the wounded as they were carried in. Burns, broken bones, people gasping for air as the station's atmosphere began leaking through cracks in the hull. She moved from patient to patient, doing what she could, knowing it would never be enough. Maria led a small team of security officers to the docking bay, hoping to mount some kind of defense. They had rifles and sidearms, weapons designed to stop smugglers and settle bar fights. Against warships from the stars, they might as well have been throwing rocks. The alien fleet surrounded Kepler Station like wolves around a wounded deer. Ship after ship fired into the helpless outpost, tearing through metal and flesh without mercy. Daniel stayed at his console, sending his distress signal over and over, watching his station die around him. A face appeared on his screen, and he realized with shock that the aliens were finally responding. The creature that looked back at him was tall and covered in dark scales, with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its narrow face. It wore armor decorated with symbols Daniel did not recognize, and when it spoke, the translator struggled to keep up. "I am Sovereign Kethral of the Vethkai Dominion," the creature said. "Your territory now belongs to us. Your species is weak. Your worlds will fall. This is not a war. This is simply nature. The strong consume the weak." Daniel stared at the alien commander, at the cold certainty in those 4 eyes. He thought about the families huddled in the shelters below, the children crying for their parents, the miners and scientists who had come here hoping to build something new. "You'll regret this," Daniel said softly. "You don't know what you've done." Kethral made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your kind makes threats even as you die." Amusing, but empty. The transmission cut off. A moment later, a massive blast struck the command center directly. Daniel had just enough time to look out the window one last time, to see the stars he had watched so many nights, before everything went white. The last signal from Kepler Station was broken and incomplete. It contained coordinates, sensor readings, fragments of video showing angular ships and green energy beams. It contained a single word repeated 3 times before the transmission died forever. Invasion. 2,000 people had lived on Kepler Station. Men and women, children and elderly, doctors and miners, and scientists who had dreamed of touching the stars. In less than an hour, they were all gone, reduced to debris drifting through the void. Sovereign Kethral broadcast a message to any human vessels in range, declaring his dominion over the outer territories. He expected panic. He expected pleas for mercy. He expected the soft creatures of Earth to come crawling forward, begging for terms. Instead, he received only silence. And in that silence, something was already beginning to stir. The message from Kepler Station took 3 days to reach Luna Base. It traveled across the vast emptiness of space at the speed of light, carrying with it the last words of 2,000 human beings. When it finally arrived, it was broken and filled with static, but the meaning was clear enough. Admiral Patricia Cole stood in the communications center as technicians worked to clean up the signal. She was 62 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many battles to count. She had served Earth for 40 years, rising through the ranks during the expansion into deep space. She had hoped her career would end peacefully, with humanity reaching out to meet new friends among the stars. The video footage from Kepler Station erased that hope forever. She watched the angular ships tear through the outpost. She watched the green energy beams slice through metal like paper. She watched Commander Daniel Hart speak his final words to the alien creature that called itself Sovereign Kethral. She watched 2,000 people die in less than an hour. When the recording ended, she stood in silence for a long moment. Then she picked up her communicator and spoke 3 words. "Call the council." Within 6 hours, the most powerful people on Earth and its colonies had gathered in the war room deep beneath Luna Base. President Nathan Ellis sat at the head of the table, his face pale and drawn. Around him sat generals and admirals, scientists and diplomats, all of them staring at the same footage that had haunted Patricia Cole since morning. Captain Gregory Lane, head of military intelligence, presented what little they knew. The attackers call themselves the Vethkai Dominion. Based on the ship designs and the transmission from their commander, we believe they control a significant territory about 200 light-years from Earth's outer colonies. They appear to be expansionist and highly militaristic. Their technology seems roughly equal to ours in most areas, perhaps slightly superior in weapon systems. "Do we know why they attacked?" President Ellis asked. The alien commander made his reasons clear, "Sir. He views humanity as weak, easy prey. He intends to take our outer territories and expand further. Gregory paused. He doesn't expect us to fight back. The room erupted in arguments. Some voices called for immediate retaliation, demanding that Earth show these aliens the cost of attacking human beings. Others urged caution, pointing out that humanity knew almost nothing about the Vethkai or their full military strength. A few suggested attempting diplomatic contact, offering territory in exchange for peace. Admiral Cole listened to the debate without speaking. She had already made up her mind, but she waited for the others to tire themselves out. Presidents and politicians needed to feel that every option had been considered. She understood that. She also understood that only one option would actually work. When the room finally fell quiet, President Ellis turned to her. "Admiral Cole, you've been silent. What's your recommendation?" Patricia stood and walked to the display screen at the front of the room. She called up a star map showing human territory and, beyond it, the estimated location of Vethkai space. She let everyone study the image for a moment before speaking. "The Vethkai did not attempt to communicate before their attack," she said. "They did not demand tribute or territory. They did not take prisoners or offer terms. They simply appeared, killed 2,000 civilians, and broadcast a message declaring us prey." She turned to face the council. "They believe we are weak because we have not fought a major war in over a century. They believe we are soft because we built research stations instead of battleships. They believe we will surrender because that is what weak species do when faced with superior force." "What are you suggesting?" a diplomat asked nervously. "I am suggesting that we show them how wrong they are." Patricia pressed a button, and new information appeared on the screen. The Prometheus Protocol was developed 30 years ago as a response to exactly this situation. An unprovoked attack by a hostile alien power, a clear indication that diplomacy and negotiation are impossible, a need to demonstrate, beyond any doubt, that humanity is not to be trifled with. President Ellis leaned forward. "And what exactly does the Prometheus Protocol involve?" "Complete destruction of the enemy's homeworld." The room went silent. Several council members looked at each other in shock. The diplomat who had spoken earlier turned pale and gripped the edge of the table. "You're talking about genocide," someone said. "I'm talking about survival," Patricia replied calmly. "The Vethkai have declared their intentions openly. They see us as prey. As long as they exist as a unified power, they will continue hunting us. Destroying their homeworld will break their government, scatter their forces, and send a message to every other species watching from the darkness." President Ellis rubbed his eyes. He was a good man, Patricia knew. A man who had dedicated his life to peace and prosperity. A man who now had to make the hardest decision any human being had ever faced. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we become the monsters they claim we are." "No, sir." Patricia shook her head. "We become survivors. We become the species that nobody attacks twice. We become the reason that future alien civilizations think very carefully before they threaten Earth's children." The debate continued for another 2 hours, but Patricia could see the outcome taking shape. The footage from Kepler Station played over and over in everyone's minds. The faces of children, the screams of dying colonists, the cold certainty in Sovereign Kethral's 4 eyes as he called humanity weak. In the end, President Ellis called for a vote. It was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Prometheus Protocol was authorized. As the council members filed out of the war room, President Ellis stopped beside Admiral Cole. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the weight of the decision had aged him 10 years in a single day. "History will judge us for this," he said quietly. "History will remember that we protected our people," Patricia replied. "That's all that matters." She walked to her private office and began issuing orders. The battleship Avalon would lead a fleet of 12 vessels into Vethkai territory. They would travel in complete silence, broadcasting nothing, revealing nothing. The Vethkai expected fear and begging. They would receive neither. As she worked through the night, Patricia allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pulled up the personnel records from Kepler Station and scrolled through the names. Miners and scientists. teachers and doctors, a woman named Maria Santos, who had died defending people who could not defend themselves, a man named Daniel Hart who had spent his final moments warning Earth of what was coming. 2,000 names. 2,000 lives. The Vethkai had made an example of Kepler Station. Earth would make an example of them. Patricia closed the file and returned to work. There was much to do, and she would not rest until it was done. Somewhere in the darkness of space, an alien empire waited to be taught a lesson it would never forget. Humanity was not prey. And the galaxy was about to learn why. The battleship Avalon moved through hyperspace like a ghost, surrounded by 11 other vessels that made no sound and cast no shadow. Captain Henry Shaw stood on the bridge, watching the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel through the main view screen. He had not spoken in over an hour, and his crew had learned to respect his silence. Commander Lisa Trent stood at the tactical station, reviewing fleet positions for the 100th time. She was Shaw's executive officer, a woman who had served with him for 7 years across a dozen missions. She knew his moods better than anyone, and she could tell that something heavy was weighing on his mind. "Captain," she said quietly, "we'll reach Vethkai space in approximately 18 hours. Shaw nodded without turning around. "Thank you, Commander. Make sure all ships maintain communications blackout. Nothing goes out. Nothing comes in. We're ghosts until we reach the target." Lieutenant Derek Pope looked up from the weapons console. He was young, barely 30, with the kind of eager energy that hadn't yet been worn down by years of service. He was also the officer responsible for operating the quantum disruption array, the weapon that would end a civilization. "Sir, final diagnostics on the QDA are complete," Pope reported. "The weapon is functioning within normal parameters. We're ready to deploy on your command. Onway. Sevenway. Onway." "Good." Shaw finally turned away from the view screen. "Get some rest, Lieutenant. Both of you. We have a long day ahead of us." Lisa and Derek exchanged glances but obeyed without argument. Shaw watched them leave the bridge, then settled into his command chair and pulled up a file on his personal screen. It was the same file he had been reading every night since they left Earth. The personnel records from Kepler Station. He scrolled through the names slowly, reading each one. Peter Hoffman, age 42, mining supervisor. Rebecca Marsh, age 35, teacher. The Collins family, parents and 3 children, the youngest only 4 years old. 2,000 names, 2,000 stories, all ending in fire and silence. Shaw had been a soldier for 25 years. He had fought pirates in the asteroid belt. He had defended colonies from corporate raiders. He had done things that haunted his sleep and left scars on his soul. But he had never done anything like what he was about to do. He was going to destroy a planet. He was going to kill billions of beings, most of whom had nothing to do with the attack on Kepler Station. He was going to commit an act that would echo through history forever, marking humanity as a species capable of unthinkable violence. And he was going to do it anyway, because if he didn't, the Vethkai would keep coming. They would attack another outpost, another colony, another peaceful station full of families and children. They would keep killing until humanity was broken, scattered, reduced to slaves or corpses. Shaw had seen the footage from Kepler Station. He had watched Sovereign Kethrol declare humanity as prey. He understood what they were dealing with. Some enemies could not be negotiated with. Some enemies understood only one language. Shaw was about to speak that language fluently. Far across the galaxy, Sovereign Kethrol sat on his throne aboard the Dominion flagship, growing impatient. A full week had passed since the destruction of the human outpost, and still there had been no response. No warships, no diplomats, no desperate pleas for mercy, just silence. His advisors assured him that this was a good sign. The humans were obviously too frightened to respond. They were probably arguing among themselves, trying to decide how much territory to surrender. They were weak, just as Kethrol had always believed. "The prey hides in its burrow," one advisor said with satisfaction. "They hope we will forget them. They hope we will turn our attention elsewhere." Kethrol made a sound of contempt. "We will not forget. When we have secured this sector, We will move deeper into their territory. We will take their colonies one by one until nothing remains but ashes and memories. He looked out the window of his ship at the blue-green sphere of Vethra Prime below, the homeworld of his species, the heart of the Dominion, the center of everything his people had built over thousands of years. Soon, he would add human worlds to his empire. Soon, he would be remembered as the greatest conqueror in Veth-Kai history. The thought pleased him greatly. Back on the Avalon, Henry Shaw finally closed the personnel file and tried to sleep. He managed a few restless hours before Lisa Trent's voice came over the intercom, calling him back to the bridge. "We're approaching the drop point, sir. All ships report ready." Shaw dressed quickly and made his way through the quiet corridors of his ship. The crew members he passed looked at him with a mixture of respect and something else. Something harder to name. They all knew what they were about to do. They all had their own thoughts about it. Derek Pope was already at the weapons console when Shaw arrived, checking the quantum disruption array one final time. He looked up as the captain entered, and Shaw saw the question in his eyes before the young man spoke it. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead, Lieutenant." Derek hesitated. "Do you have any doubts about what we're about to do?" Shaw considered the question carefully. He thought about the children on Kepler Station. He thought about the families who would never come home. He thought about Maria Santos, dying with a rifle in her hands, trying to protect people who could not protect themselves. "I have many doubts," he said finally. "But I also have certainty. The Veth-Kai started this war. They chose to attack civilians. They chose to call us prey. They chose to show us no mercy. Now we're going to show them what happens when you corner a species that has spent its entire history fighting to survive." Derek nodded slowly. "I understand, sir." "Do you?" Shaw looked at his weapons officer with tired eyes. "We're about to kill billions of beings. That weight will stay with us forever. It will change us. It will haunt our dreams. But our children will live, Lieutenant. Our colonies will survive. Our species will continue. And sometimes, that's the only victory that matters." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Veth-Kai system. For a long moment, nothing moved. The 12 human ships hung in the darkness like silent judges, their weapons powered down, their engines cold. Then Captain Shaw gave a single order: "Take us in." The silent fleet began to move, gliding toward Vethra Prime like death itself. No announcements, no warnings, no mercy. The Veth-Kai had wanted to see what humanity was capable of. They were about to find out. The Avalon emerged from the darkness like a predator from deep water. Behind it came the rest of the fleet. 12 vessels moving in perfect formation, their hulls black against the stars. They had traveled across the void without making a sound, and now they announced their presence in the only way that mattered. Commander Lisa Trent's fingers flew across her console as she coordinated the attack. Targeting orbital defense platforms. "All ships, fire on my mark." The Veth-Kai had built their defenses to stop invading fleets, to repel enemies who came screaming in with warnings and demands. They had not built them to stop ghosts. By the time their sensors registered the human ships, the first missiles were already in flight. Explosions blossomed across the orbital ring surrounding Vethra Prime. Defense platforms crumbled under precise strikes that disabled weapons and shattered communications arrays. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes. When it was over, the planet lay naked beneath the human fleet, stripped of its protective shell. Sovereign Kethril was eating his evening meal when the alarms began to wail. He threw down his food and rushed to the command center of his flagship, demanding answers from officers who had none to give. The displays showed chaos, destruction, death, and at the center of it all, a fleet of human warships that had appeared from nowhere. "How is this possible?" he roared. "We detected nothing. No hyperspace signatures, no engine emissions, nothing." "They used some kind of stealth technology, Sovereign," an officer stammered. "We've never seen anything like it. They were invisible until they were already among us." Kethril stared at the display, watching his orbital defenses burn. For the first time since he had ordered the attack on Kepler Station, he felt something cold creeping into his chest. It might have been fear. "Open a channel to the human vessels," he commanded. "I will speak with them." On the bridge of the Avalon, Captain Henry Shaw watched the Vethkai homeworld rotate slowly below him. It was a beautiful planet, he thought. Blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds. From space, it looked peaceful, serene, alive. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Dominion flagship," Lisa reported. "They want to talk." Shaw nodded slowly. "Put them through." Sovereign Kethral's face appeared on the main view screen. His 4 eyes were wide, his scales darker than they had appeared in the recording from Kepler Station. When he spoke, his voice carried an edge that had not been there before. "Human Commander, I am Sovereign Kethral of the Vethkai Dominion. You have attacked our homeworld without provocation. This is an act of war. State your terms for negotiation." Shaw did not respond immediately. He let the silence stretch out. Let the alien leader wait. Let the fear grow deeper. Then he turned to Lieutenant Derek Pope. "Lieutenant, play the recording." Derek pressed a button, and a computer voice began to speak. It read names, one after another, in a calm, steady tone. Peter Hoffman, Rebecca Marsh, Daniel Hart, Maria Santos, Caroline Webb, the Collins family, name after name after name, 2,000 in total. Kethral watched the list scroll across his display with growing confusion. "What is this? What are these names?" "These are the people you killed at Kepler Station," Shaw said quietly. "Men and women, children and elderly, scientists and miners, teachers and doctors. You murdered them without warning. You called them weak. You called them prey." The names continued. Kethral's 4 eyes darted back and forth, following the endless stream of human identities. It took 7 minutes to read them all. When the recording finally stopped, Shaw leaned forward in his chair. "You wanted to know what humans are capable of, Sovereign. You wanted to see if we would fight back. Consider your question answered." "Wait," Kethral said, his voice rising. "We can negotiate. We can offer territory, resources, whatever you want. This does not have to end in more death." "You're right," Shaw agreed. "It could have ended differently. If you had tried to talk before you started killing. If you had seen us as equals instead of prey. If you had shown our people even the smallest measure of mercy." He shook his head. "But you didn't. And now it's too late." He turned to his weapons officer. "Lieutenant Pope, activate the quantum disruption array." Derek's hands hesitated over the console for just a moment. Then he thought of the footage from Kepler Station, of children running through corridors as the station burned around them, of Commander Hart's final words before the transmission died. His hands steadied. "Activating QDA," he said, firing. A beam of pure white light lanced out from the Avalon's forward array. It struck the surface of Vethra Prime and continued downward, punching through rock and magma until it reached the planet's core. The weapon did not explode. It did not burn. It simply disrupted the fundamental forces holding the planet together. For a long moment, nothing seemed to happen. Kethral watched the view screen with desperate hope, believing perhaps that the weapon had failed, that his world would survive. Then the first cracks appeared. They started small, hairline fractures spreading across the surface of continents. Then the cracks grew wider, deeper, longer. Mountains began to crumble. Oceans drained into massive fissures that glowed red with exposed magma. Cities that had stood for thousands of years collapsed into ruins in seconds. Kethral screamed. He screamed orders at officers who could not help him. He screamed curses at the human fleet that watched without emotion. He screamed prayers to gods who did not answer. His homeworld was dying, and there was nothing he could do but watch. The process took 3 hours. 3 hours of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. 3 hours of continents tearing apart and oceans boiling away. 3 hours of a civilization crumbling into dust. When it was over, Vethra Prime no longer existed. In its place was an expanding field of molten rock and debris, slowly cooling in the darkness of space. On the bridge of the Avalon, the crew watched in complete silence. Some had tears on their faces. Others looked sick. Derek Pope stared at his console with empty eyes, seeing nothing, feeling everything. Only Captain Shaw remained composed, his face carved from stone. "Commander Trent," he said finally, "set a course for Earth. All ships." "Yes, sir." Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. Shaw stood and looked at the view screen one last time. Where a planet had been, now there was only wreckage. Billions of lives, thousands of years of history, an entire civilization, all gone in 3 hours. He had done this. He would carry it forever. "Sir," Derek said quietly, "Kethral's ship is still transmitting. He's watching the debris field." Shaw nodded. "Let him watch. Let him understand what he brought upon his people. Let him live with that knowledge for whatever time he has left." He turned and walked toward his quarters, pausing at the door. "We're done here," he said without looking back. "Take us home." The silent fleet turned away from the grave of Vethra Prime and disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind nothing but destruction and a broken alien commander who would never forget what he had witnessed. Humanity had sent its message. The galaxy had received it. The news of Vethra Prime's destruction spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Within days, every spacefaring civilization knew what had happened. They knew that an alien empire had attacked a human outpost without warning. They knew that Earth had responded by erasing the attacker's homeworld from existence. They knew that humanity had done what most species considered unthinkable, and they knew to be afraid. Admiral Patricia Cole stood in the war room of Luna Base, watching reports flow in from across explored space. Intelligence officers had intercepted communications from dozens of alien civilizations, all discussing the same event. The Kethmai Confederacy had canceled planned expansion into human-adjacent territory. The Vorn Trading Coalition had sent diplomatic overtures expressing friendship and a desire for peaceful commerce. 3 separate species that had been considering military action against Earth's outer colonies had quietly dissolved their war plans. President Nathan Ellis entered the room, looking older and more tired than Patricia had ever seen him. He sat down heavily in a chair and stared at the displays without speaking. "The Vethkai Dominion has collapsed," Patricia reported. "Without their homeworld, their government fell apart within hours. Their remaining colonies are fighting among themselves for control. Our analysts estimate it will take generations for them to rebuild any kind of unified power, if they ever do." Ellis nodded slowly. "And Kethral? Still alive, as far as we know. His flagship escaped the system before our fleet departed. He's been broadcasting messages calling for revenge, but nobody is listening. His own people blame him for what happened." "Good." The word came out flat and empty. He should live with what he caused. He should spend the rest of his life knowing that his arrogance killed his civilization. Patricia sat down across from the president. "Sir, I know this is difficult, but we achieved our objective. Earth is safe. Our colonies are protected. No other species will attack us for a very long time. Is that supposed to make me feel better?" Ellis looked at her with haunted eyes. "We killed billions of people, Patricia. Civilians. Children. Beings who had nothing to do with Kepler Station. We became exactly what Kethral accused us of being." "No, sir." Patricia shook her head firmly. "We became survivors. There's a difference." The fleet returned to Earth 3 weeks later. Captain Henry Shaw was the last to disembark from the Avalon, walking down the ramp into the bright sunlight of the Luna Base landing bay. A crowd had gathered to greet the returning ships, but Shaw pushed through them without acknowledging the cheers or the cameras. He found Admiral Cole waiting for him outside the main building. She fell into step beside him, and they walked in silence for a long moment before she spoke. "You did your duty, Captain. Earth owes you a debt that can never be repaid." "I don't want gratitude," Shaw said quietly. "I want to forget. But I know I never will." A reporter somehow got past security and appeared in front of them, shoving a microphone toward Shaw's face. "Captain, the public wants to know, do you regret destroying an entire world? Do you consider yourself a hero or a monster?" Shaw stopped walking. He looked at the reporter for a long moment, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but heavy with exhaustion. I regret that 2,000 innocent people died on Kepler Station. I regret that the Vethkai decided humanity looked like easy prey. I regret that they gave us no choice but to respond the way we did. He paused. I don't regret teaching the galaxy that our lives have value, that we protect our own, that attacking our people has consequences. He pushed past the reporter and continued walking. Admiral Cole caught up with him a moment later. That was well said, Captain. It was the truth. Shaw kept his eyes forward. I'll carry what we did for the rest of my life. My crew will carry it, but our grandchildren will live in a galaxy where nobody dares to attack Earth. That has to count for something. In the months that followed, humanity began to rebuild. A new station rose from the asteroid where Kepler Station had once stood, larger and better defended than its predecessor. They called it New Kepler, and at its heart was a memorial garden containing the names of everyone who had died in the original attack. Lieutenant Derek Pope was among the first to visit the completed memorial. He stood before the wall of names, reading them one by one, remembering the recording he had played before firing the weapon that killed a world. He stayed until the artificial night cycle dimmed the lights, then returned to his ship without speaking to anyone. Commander Lisa Trent found him later in the Avalon's observation deck, staring out at the stars. She sat down beside him without saying anything, and they watched the universe in silence for a long time. Do you think we're monsters? Derek finally asked. Lisa considered the question carefully. I think we're human. We love our families. We protect our children. We remember our dead, and when something threatens all of that, we fight back with everything we have. Even if it means becoming the thing we hate, even then. She looked at him with sad eyes. The galaxy is full of predators, Derek. Species that see kindness as weakness and mercy as opportunity. If we want to survive out there, we have to show them that we're not victims. We're not prey. We're something else entirely. On a dozen different worlds, alien leaders studied the reports from Vethra Prime and drew their own conclusions. The humans were dangerous. The humans were ruthless. The humans were not to be trifled with under any circumstances. Plans for conquest and expansion were quietly shelved. Diplomatic missions were prepared instead. Some species were horrified by what Earth had done. They called humanity barbaric, savage, a threat to galactic civilization. But none of them raised their voices too loudly. None of them wanted to find out if they might be next. President Ellis gave a speech on the anniversary of the Kepler Station attack. He spoke of loss and sacrifice, of difficult choices and terrible consequences. He spoke of hope for a future where such actions would never be necessary again. And at the edge of human space, patrol ships maintained their endless watch. They scanned the darkness for threats. They stood ready to defend colonies full of families and children and people who just wanted to live their lives in peace. Humanity had hoped to meet the stars with open hands. They had hoped to find friends and allies among the distant lights. Instead, they had found predators who saw them as meat. Now those predators knew the truth. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was something far more dangerous. A species that would burn worlds to protect its own. A species that remembered every name, every face, every life that was taken from them. The galaxy watched the silent border of human space and felt something new, something that had not existed before the destruction of Vethra Prime. They felt fear. And in the memorial garden of New Kepler Station, 2,000 names glowed softly in the eternal night of space. They would never be forgotten. They would never be avenged enough, but they would always be remembered. A reminder of what humanity had lost and what they had been willing to do in response. The universe had many predators. It had now learned, at terrible cost, that humanity would never be their victim. The stars continued to burn. The darkness continued to stretch on forever. And somewhere out there, watching and waiting, other civilizations quietly decided that Earth's children were best left alone. Some prey fought back, some prey became predators themselves, and some prey became something else entirely. Something that even predators learned to fear. Humanity had found its place among the stars. It had cost them their innocence, but they had survived. They would always survive.